Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. And today I have a great pleasure having Cindy Dawn, VP of Engineering at Nautilus Lab, and we'll talk about the 4 dimensions of balanced engineering leader. So first, let me welcome my guest, Cindy. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Limor. Thank you for inviting me to be in your podcast. It's such a pleasure. And yeah, it's going well. It's getting a
Yeah.
little cold in Chicago, but it's beautiful day today.
Yeah. Here I wish it was colder, but it's okay. It's getting better. At least it's not hot as it used to be. And Cindy, before we start diving in, I would love it if you can just share with our audience who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I would love to. So I am, and I've been an engineering leader for about 8+ years now, and my whole career have been in software. I started as a software engineer in a trading industry for 8 years. And then I realized that, I want to do something meaningful with my 9 to 5 where I can work on a product that creates a change in some industries that really need to utilize technology. And that's basically where I started my journey in different startup companies such as Relativity, like a legal software company, and then Jellyvision, an HR-based software that helps employees like find the benefits that really fits their needs. Root, an auto insurance company that utilizes AI, and that's where I find my passion in AI because I do believe that it is the foundation of our future, and I want to make sure that we have a diverse perspective in forming what that future looks like. And until now, I landed as a VP of engineering, the head of engineering in Nautilus Labs, a climate solution software in the maritime industry whose mission is to decarbonize the ocean.
Wow, this is incredible. Very impressive journey. And let's dive right in. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to start discussing actually your experience as a senior engineer, starting a job while you were 2 months pregnant. Can you
Yeah.
share your experience working, you know, um, working with young single men as a
Yeah.
pregnant woman? I think that will be very interesting story to tell to our audience.
Yes, Limor, that was definitely not an easy time in my career. It was right after I exited the trading industry. I was, young and very passionate and doing something different. I joined this company, and I wanted to really dive right in and be a senior software engineer in the team. I realized that I was pregnant when I accepted the job. It was an interesting onboarding experience as well because we actually have to prepare for a test, and we don't know what team we will be in because some people may not even make it through the test. And so I didn't have a manager to guide me through all the different kind of like options. And so by the time I finished the test and I find a team, I was already maybe around like 5 months pregnant. I asked my manager, and it turns out that I wasn't able to get like a full 3 months maternity leave, which was very disappointing at that time. And the whole experience of being pregnant, visibly pregnant, my first child, and it was a very young startup with a lot of young men, single men who don't really know how to talk to me, right? They're like, oh yeah, okay, it's just sort of like, okay, you have a bump. And it felt very awkward. I remember my manager at that time also liked to throw parties and a lot of alcohol. And, as a pregnant woman, I cannot drink. And it was just like feeling very out of place. in an environment where, you know, everybody is just free to party and socialize, and there I am, like this kind of like weird you know, woman alone who's like pregnant. I also realized one thing, that the policy of maternity leave not being allowed for folks who haven't been working for 1 year or so is something that had, if I were a leader at that time, I would totally advocate for. You know what? We hired very bright young mind. We're not going to punish them for you know, like having a child. Well, they haven't been in the company for a while. I think that is one kind of like moment where I realized we do truly need a diverse perspective in the leadership.
This is so true. Absolutely. When you have leaders who don't understand that, who don't, experience that firsthand, it's very hard for them to even acknowledge it is a problem. And this is exactly why we need to have, as you mentioned, diverse leadership. We need to have women, we need to have people of color, we need to have people from different backgrounds in leadership so they can create more inclusive companies.
Yes, absolutely. Just having an empathy rather than looking at the bottom line is very important, and it creates, there is a reason why diversity is important, right? In a team of all single young male, decisions are just gonna be made in a very laser focused perspective, and bringing in someone who already have a family and everything, I mean, it's but then if you want to encourage such diversity, it is important to match that with the company policy that supports us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And other than that, and the policy, what else did you take away from that experience? Especially, I want to touch about the fact that you felt like the outlier, you felt different from everyone else, and they were doing activities that really didn't resonate with you and were not appropriate to the stage you were at the time.
Yes, and I think that is one of the things that would weed out a lot of women of color or folks who feel like they don't belong, right? There's this sense of belonging, and as human being, we all crave belonging. We spend 8 hours at least in working in an office or sometimes remotely, but interacting with folks. And when we don't feel like we belong in the team, let alone the company, it's very easy for folks to feel like this is not for me. And that is definitely unfortunate.
That
So yeah, I
is
think it
so
is
true.
important for having managers who understand and check in, right? And you know, you don't look like you're comfortable. Like, is there something that we can do to support you better? I think just having empathy, which often is underappreciated, is such an important quality in managers.
Absolutely. And women are very empathetic leaders.
Yes,
And it is very
absolutely.
important to note that we need more women in leadership positions so we can have more empathetic leadership. I'm not saying that men are not, but women are very, very empathetic. And just seeing everyone and thinking, the problem is that leaders don't think about how does that pregnant woman feels
Right.
when everyone goes out to drink and she cannot participate.
Correct. Yeah, for sure, Limor. That's a really good point. The one thing that I would say is, to your point, a manager of mine, after, so a little bit of a continuation of that story. When my child is born, I only had 1.5 months of a break, and then I had to go back to work. It was very heartbreaking to leave a small infant and having to go back to work, where at that time the team is again very single male centric, right? A lot of alcohols and everything, and all I can think of is I miss my child. So I talked to my manager at that time. I said, I want to quit, right? It could have been the end of my career, honestly. And you know what he did? He said, I will try to get you a part-time role so that you can continue working here and be with your child, which is such an amazing gesture. And having like kind of like advocating for that to like the upper leadership and being able to give me that opportunity, which allows me to then, after 1 year, I came back to the company, and that's how I started my journey as a manager. I applied to a manager position, and then here I am right now. So it's
Yeah,
that small moment of just, you know what? I understand that you need this. You don't need to leave completely. You can be part-time. Just think outside of the box and understand the team members' needs. It could really make a difference in someone's lives.
wow, this is so true. And just you saying that if that manager was not supporting you, maybe that was the end of your career, is really, important for us to note, because we don't want women like you to just give up on their careers when they face those challenges and no one is there to support them. And you mentioned like missing your baby. Obviously, this is hard. To be honest, it's hard, also when they are 6 months old. But on top of that, when you return to work with such a small baby, you're always very tired, you're exhausted because you don't sleep very well at night. So even physically,
Yeah.
very hard.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we are human, and our family, especially our babies, our kids will always come first. And that sometimes is like the conundrum with us women, especially as we embark onto like making building our family.
Yeah. And I want just to call out to our listeners here that have positions of power. We need you to really give support because we want those women to stay. We don't want them to leave.
Absolutely.
And let's kind of progress. You mentioned engineering manager, so let's progress to your progression to an engineering manager position.
Yeah.
How was your experience becoming a manager for the first time, managing a team?
Yeah, Limor, it was actually very interesting. I was promoted to an engineering management position because I was a strong IC. And usually that means strong technically. I understand the code base very well. I was able to deliver strong results, and therefore they trust me and kind of like taking on the engineering management. But the one thing that I quickly realized is using that same muscle that allows me to excel as an individual contributor, it's not going to work as an engineering manager, right? So as many people, I started my career as an engineering manager being very tech focused. So I was just looking at, okay, we gotta have like really good technical strategy, which is important. And I'm gonna pair with my folks, and I'm gonna be in like every meeting so that I can come up with like the best solution, because like that is how I see myself. My identity is someone who always come up with like the best solution. And quickly I realized that my teams don't feel very empowered, and I get burned out because there are a lot of technical decisions to be made. I went from being an individual contributor who only have to focus on one task to managing a team of 5 or 6, and there are multiple technical decisions that have to be made, and I cannot be everywhere all at once. So either I force my team to only focus on one thing, or I give them the tools and trust them and identify who I can delegate things to. And that's kind of like how I realized that as an engineering manager, there are several dimensions that I need to grow and learn to be better for my team, to show up for them, and to actually give them the right guidance so that they can make the best decision that they can.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll dive into those dimensions in a minute. Just want to share here that, yes, what you face is very common, right? When you transition from an IC to a manager, you try to operate like you try to be a problem solver, you try to be the best technical person you can, but actually that's not your role anymore. Your role is to empower others to be the best at what they do and solve problems, and you're there to support them. And it's a struggle that is faced by many, many others, like yourself, like myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that I've talked to a lot of engineering managers and like the early career and mid-career. And perhaps you can also relate to this, Limor, but after realizing that, oh, being a tech focused, just solely tech focused doesn't work, I'm gonna swing to the other side and be very people focused. I'm gonna create a team where everybody's happy. And that doesn't work either, because really what is missing there is the why, right? Like, why are we doing this, and how do we make sure that we are prioritizing the right things? Because otherwise, being only tech focused and people focused would probably mean that, and this is a mistake that I did early in my career, I will trust my team to choose what they want to do, right? Like, so like my engineer A would say, we gotta fix this code base. All right, you go do that. Engineer B would say, we gotta fix the other code base and this way. All right, you do that. And so like I have a team of 5 people making 5 different changes, but not being able to say why all these changes are important.
Absolutely. And I was guilty as charged in that too, Cindy. I mean, trying to please is one of the common mistakes that new managers do. And especially, I think, women leaders, we want to be liked, we want to be appreciated, and we try to be a people pleaser. We try to make everyone happy, but eventually that's not going to be great leadership, right? And we cannot have everyone happy, loving, at the same time. It doesn't work that way, right? The reality proves us usually differently.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like connected to earlier what we say with empathy being one of like the strength of that's common in a lot of women leaders, that empathy sometimes could be overused, where we want to please them because we empathize with them and we understand their perspective. And so we're like, you know what? Yeah, why don't you try that? And not have enough pushback or accountability that pairs with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive in. Tell us, what are the 4 dimensions for a balanced engineering manager?
Yeah. So one thing that I have found is when looking at engineering management, I tend to make sure that I see it from 4 different lenses. We talked about 2, the technology for sure. I mean, that is why we are engineering leaders, and we never should lose that edge. It is easy to lose that edge, especially as you get higher up in the ladder. We get further away from the technical, and we have to really try be intentional in making sure that we stay sharp and we stay up to date with like the latest in the technology, and also to understand how the code base is being developed and the architecture. But technology is important, people is important. And when I say people here, I'm not talking about the goal of retaining everybody that you have, but really understanding individuals' strengths, weaknesses, their career goals, as well as how the team is gelling. And I think that is the one thing that as I grow in my career journey, one thing that I realize is it's like a system design where each individual is they interact with each other, and there is like, if you have the right system design, the right architecture, 5 people will make a really strong team. But if we have like, if we're not designing it correctly, for example, if you have like some isolated knowledge, or if you have some individual that doesn't play well with the others, then your system is actually weaker with like that individual. So really understanding how the architecture of your team looks like. For me, that's what like being people, the people lens looks like. The third one is process, obviously, and I think this could be like the fun problems for a lot of engineering managers, right? We see issues and we're like, okay, this is like the solutioning. The next level of solutioning for engineering management is, how can I automate this problem solution using a process? And that is important. But process also relates to how do we deliver, right? Like at the end of the day, our function as an engineering leader is product development and product delivery. So how can we set our process in a way that we can deliver the right product to the right customers and get the feedback as fast as we can? So that's process, and we can definitely talk about that. This is related to a lot of the metrics that is well known, such as the DORA metrics, or the things that are set out in like the Accelerate book, as well as velocity and all that falls into process. The last one that I think is more and more important as we grow in the ladder is the product sense. And product sense is understanding, right, at a very low level, what is the requirement, what are we delivering, and then at a higher level, what does the business needs, right? Like if we have an OKR, if we have like an objective and key results, why are we setting our OKR that way for this quarter? Where's the business evolving at this point, and what do we need to unlock the next level?
Perfect. So let me recap the 4 and let's dive into each one of them, okay?
Absolutely.
So the first one, technology. The second one is people. The third one is process. And the fourth is product. So let's dive into technology. You mentioned the need to stay up to date, which I very much agree with. How do you do that when you are higher up at a VP role, maybe even a CTO? How do you keep up?
Yeah. Not easy, right? Because there are so many, when you are a VP or a CTO, like head of the engineering department, it's very easy to get sucked into fires, 8 hours of just firefighting, right? And so obviously delegation is the key, but making space to be heads down, which is still very important, right? It's very easy to like get like 8 hours full of meetings, but scheduling a time for me is very important to like be heads down and getting a flow going for either diving deep into the architecture of the system, because it is really important for the VP or CTO or any engineering manager, engineering leader, to understand their code. And therefore be able to have like an intelligent conversation with the engineers, with the decisions that they're making. But also, I think that's how you get the respect, right? Like engineers are not going to really truly respect the leaders who don't understand how things are developed. But the second part of it is also understanding the trends, because it is important as a leader to be forward thinking, to be innovative, and bring in some ideas that could take the technology to the next level. And so for me, it's listening to podcasts, like some technology podcasts, or reading some blogs, and even some LinkedIn, right? Like following some folks in LinkedIn that really has some new ideas. So I am in AI, so I follow several kind of like creators in AI, and just trying to understand what is your interest and where do you want to keep being innovative?
Absolutely. And I also found that industry conferences are also a great way to see what's going on, to meet different people, to connect, right, to what's going on in the industry and to stay up to date.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. And just having that network and the community, being part of the tech community is
Yes,
such a great
absolutely.
feeling.
And I always felt that a lot of times I needed to ask for help from people, from different technical people, to share with me what's going on, to maybe explain to me. And that's not a weakness. I just want to emphasize that. You don't have to do it all by yourself, especially when you get into executive roles. You cannot know everything. And especially when I felt like I needed to dive into a specific area, because obviously you don't know everything very deep, kind of you have an overall view. I wasn't afraid of stepping into someone and say, hey, I want you to walk me through something, explain to me your decision process, explain to me why things are working. That's okay. You're not supposed to know everything.
Yes, I love that. That's a really good point. I actually think, like I have one-on-ones, skip level one-on-ones with the engineers to make sure that I have that touch point and that they can talk to me and everything. But a lot of times we can use that time to like pair together, just like really ask them what they're doing and ask them to show, that's actually for engineers. And I remember this being when I was an engineer. I love it when my manager asked me like, hey, can you show me how that works? It gives me a sense of pride and just connectedness, right? Because we can geek out together.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And that kind of leads us to the next dimension perfectly, to people.
Yes.
How do you architect it all, right? Create a cohesive team or organization that operates better than just a set of individuals.
Yeah, that's a very complex problem. And and I would say from the engineering manager level, right? Like starting from like a team of 5 or 6 or however big the team is, um, taking the time and being mindful. We have performance reviews, sometimes like yearly, sometimes biannually or semi-annually. But making sure that that is not the only time that we talk about career growth or giving feedback or understanding what they're interested in. But rather, what I do is I try to specifically schedule a time to talk about that, because otherwise I would forget, right? Like things happen and you just forget. So like every month I would schedule a time. Let's talk about your career. How is it going this month? What's your career plan look like? Let's even look at the career ladder and let's go through it together and make sure that we are on the same page with um, what your accomplishment has shown, that you are meeting like some of these expectations, and what are the things that we need to focus on together so that I as a manager can delegate the right things.
Absolutely. And I also love that you mentioned earlier that you do skip level meetings. I feel that this is really important for any leader to be connected with everyone. You're not just, staying at your kind of ivory tower and looking at everyone from above. It doesn't work that way, especially nowadays with Gen Z. You have to really be connected to the people and understand what's going on, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and get your feet in the ground and get a feel for what's going on.
Yes, that's exactly. And as a VP, I coach engineering managers now, right? Like that's where I have my conversation is in terms of like career path, strengths and weaknesses. I would work on that with my engineering managers, and a lot of times talking straight to the engineers allow me to give them better feedback and give them better understanding of like, this is the area in the team that I see that maybe is a blind spot. And as a coach, I want to be able to also do my due diligence in order to help them better.
Absolutely. Love that. Love that. And just one last note about people. I personally, you mentioned performance reviews. Personally, I think that this is like an outdated idea, the annual performance reviews that need to go away from this world. I feel
Oh,
like continuous feedback and continuous conversations, like you mentioned, career conversations that are ongoing, that's the way to go. And that's the way to lead. Because what's the point in meeting once a year and reflecting back on a full year? Who remembers what happened last year, and
yes.
like giving
Agree.
feedback on something that happens a year ago? It's not relevant anymore.
I totally agree. And it's not productive to talk about, you know what, like 6 months ago, you did this, and I think you should have done it differently. It's like, we will remember different facts.
Yeah.
Right. I totally agree. And it's difficult to like remember to give real-time feedback, especially when it's a critical feedback, right? We'll be like, okay, you know what? Like, let's just let it go. But then we will have to address it at the annual performance review. And I think it is for the best interest of us as engineering leaders to have that continuous career conversation, because otherwise we're going to have a difficult time at the end of the year, because all our performance review conversation is going to be full of surprises, and it's going to be all tough conversations. And I think the minimum amount of surprises would be best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's dive into process. Tell me more about it. How can leaders utilize process?
Yeah, Lemore. So process is one of those where I think I always start with data. When we want to think about process and how to optimize, and I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that I'm an optimizer. I think a lot of us love engineering. We end up in engineering, and especially in engineering management, because we also love to optimize things. However, we have to be mindful of what to optimize, because it's anything can be optimized, but what is the one thing that the business needs to be optimized? And so we always have to start with data and understanding the baseline, right? So this is again like the DevOps metrics, like the DORA metric. And so those are like the cycle time, right? Like some of the quality metrics, such as like the mean time to recovery when we have like incidents, how quickly can we actually recover from that, but also qualitative metrics. And I say qualitative metrics in terms of like how the team performs, right? Like it's still measurable. So things like velocity, sprint completion percentage, which is one of my favorite, because actually I think that ties into the morale of the team. If the team has a habit of committing too much and then they don't finish it, they keep like, you know, pulling it back to like the next sprint or the next cycle, whatever the cycle is, the team's not going to feel good, right? Like we want to create a momentum. And so sprint completion metric is actually one of my favorite. I would say even like, how do we think about dates, right? Like when we think about like software delivery, everybody hates dates. Everybody hates having like a delivery date, like a deadline. But when you have a customer, you got to be able to say like, hey, expect to see this feature by this time. We can absolutely have a buffer, but how predictable is our delivery, right? Like, how can we say with great confidence that yes, we can announce this to our customers by a certain date, and we know that we're going to get it done. So those are
Absolutely.
the different kind of like things that we can think about when we think about a process. So starting
Yeah.
from the data and then figuring out, all right, if I want to improve velocity, what do I need to improve, right? Like, and sometimes this can come up with retrospectives, where the team start thinking about like how can they together improve the way they operate. But also the team will not realize that they need to improve if they don't see the data.
Absolutely. They need to see the data. And, to be honest, I mean, I believe in transparency. And I think that when the company operates in a level that is transparent and everyone is able to look at data and no one is blaming, there is no blaming culture. We're all in this together. We're trying to learn and improve as a company, as a team, it has to trickle from above. That's where companies can operate at their best.
Yes, blameless culture definitely is important. To your point, if we are being vulnerable and showing the data that is not as great, right? To say like, hey, our velocity is not amazing. We know that. We have measured it. And this is our plan to improve it. And you don't get murdered for it, saying like, oh, like that's terrible. How come your velocity is not good? And rather having like a supportive culture is like, that's amazing that you have a plan to improve. How can we help? That is how we can build like a really continuous improvement culture.
Yeah, for sure. Because one of the things I've seen is that some companies have toxic environments where people are kind of trying to blame each other. Because a lot of times, right, we don't work on an island. We're dependent on different parties, and when things doesn't work as we plan, and people start blaming each other. Having the data will not help.
That's true. Though I do feel like sometimes data kind of cuts through the politics. If everybody agrees, right? And if everybody feels that, all right, let's look at the data rather than making it look the way it is, right? Like having a pretty chart and like kind of smoke and mirrors. But if we really cut to the chase and like, well, let's look at the truth. I find that sometimes that could be the antidote for toxic politics.
Yes, because you cannot argue with data. You can argue with feeling, with emotions, with opinions, but with data, it's very difficult to argue.
Yes, agree.
Perfect. So let's dive into the fourth dimension, into product.
Yeah, product is the one thing that I would say elevates engineering leaders to the next level. The better we are as an engineering leader to understand our product, especially our business and how it ties into the success of the company, the easier it is for us to be given like more opportunities, to be in charge of more things. Because honestly, a leader who really understands what needs to be done and how to deliver that is a leader that everybody wants, right? Like every company needs. And so it starts from the engineering, from like the team level engineering management, by understanding, first of all, what is the product that I'm in charge of and where does that fit in the company as a whole, right? Like how can my product help make us as an organization successful? And what can I do in this ecosystem to help other products successful if there is like an interdependency, which often there is, right? And so that partnership with the product owner is very important. It's very tempting for us as engineering leaders. I see this many times. There's always this push and pull between engineering managers and product managers. And the last thing we want is for that to be like, oh, it's his fault. Oh, it's her fault, right? Like kind of like finger pointing scenario. Yeah. We need to have strong collaboration and partnership because honestly, an engineering team is not going to be successful if the product is not successful. And a product manager is not going to be successful if the engineering team is not delivering. So that everybody's success hinges on the product being well received in the market.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that, what you mentioned, being a business acumen oriented towards the business is what eventually sets you as a leader, and not just someone who executes. One thing that I wanted to highlight is that I have, clients, and obviously not every engineering team is working on a customer-facing product. Sometimes there are teams that work internally, right, on infrastructure or things that are internal, but still, it is a product. It's just an internal product.
Yes, and it's even more important. I would argue that business acumen is even more important for those roles, because a lot of times there is no product manager, right? Like a lot of time SRE manager doesn't have a product owner, but they need to determine how to prioritize, what the roadmap looks like. And one thing that I would suggest for internal facing teams leaders is to think about who your customers are and make sure that we are treating them as such, treating the internal teams as customers. So I would suggest have like monthly roadmap kind of like walkthrough, or monthly just like walk through the metrics and get feedback, right? So the same way that if we have a product, we want to engage with the customers to make sure that they're still happy, they're still satisfied, and they still pay us for our services. That is how I think an internal facing team leader should think of treating the other internal teams.
Absolutely. Very much agree with you. And cannot believe how time flies. Before we end our conversation, I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to women that aspire to become great engineering leaders like yourself? What they need to do in order to get there, especially women of color?
Yeah, I would say find allies, find mentors, right? This is the one thing that really, for example, when I almost quit my job, that allyship with the manager and internally, because like folks know me. So when he advocated for me, like it was not met with like, well, we don't know who this person is, like let's not make exception for this person. So the more friends and allies and supporters you can find, the better. And this doesn't mean that, I'm an introvert, right? Like I don't naturally like, hey, let's party, like I'm not naturally a social person, but just be authentic and really have an interest with what the others do, and understand what they can bring into the table. I think a lot of times folks love if they're asked for advice or just like a quick coffee and everything. And honestly, make use of it. Don't be shy, especially in the beginning of the career, because building that foundation of having folks that support you is really, really important, especially as a woman of color.
Absolutely. And where can our listeners find you?
You can find me in LinkedIn, and I'm in Chicago, so I try to go to like the different meetups in AIs, and I'm passionate about climate, so I try to follow a lot of climate talks as well in Chicago. But yeah, really, really lovely to be here, Limor, and it's always nice to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Cindy. It was so insightful. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure.